Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live sesh with Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. We'll go ahead and wait for folks to pile in here for a minute or two. And want to see who's in chat with us today. So, hello from the voice of B2B. If you are here live with us today for, again, a how to make your podcast great learning session, go ahead and jump in chat and just give me a wave. Let me know who's here so I can target some specific commentary to our audience today. So would love to know who we've got chiming in, watching, and learning some great podcast tips. Happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope everyone's starting the middle of the week to a, I guess, strong start, maybe beginning a strong finish. Kind of a glass half full, half empty type approach to the week. All right, let's wait and see here who we've got. Who we've got joining us today. Who we got here today? Give me a wave. Who we got here in with us today for our learning session? Who we've got? All right, let's see. Anyone here in with us today? Anyone here in with us today? Who we got on the chat today? Who we've got? Don't be shy. Give me a wave. Let me know who's here so I can tailor some specific commentary to our audience. Anyone with us here today? We can go ahead and get started here any minute. Anyone here with us today? Hello. Into the ether, my friends, anyone? All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started, and I will go ahead and jump in. So it looks like we've got a Terry in. Hello, Mr. Terry. So we'll go ahead and keep today's abbreviated, and we will jump into, again, what makes for a great podcast. Let's get rid of that low bar there. There we go. All right, team. Let's jump in. So hello again, my name's Daniel, and I'm here to walk you through some basics on what makes for a great podcast. So these are tips for preparing for and running a successful podcast episode. So here's the agenda. I'll give you all a quick intro on myself. I'll then jump in on the importance of a strong foundation for your podcast. We'll then go over a little bit of the topic, right? Pre-production and research. I will give you some during the episode final closer tips and then open it up to a Q&A. So who am I? Well, I am the voice of B2B. I'm Daniel Litwin here. I am one of our main hosts, MCs, editorial pros, and journos here in the MarketScale ecosystem. I head up the editorial side of MarketScale. And so what I'm hoping to do is pull from my experience, which is chock full of hosting at least, it feels like 1,000 podcasts over the last several years, to give y'all perspectives that work, right? What works for me in my podcast world to launch a great podcast episode, come up with a quality podcast concept, and how can y'all apply that to your own day-to-day? So let's jump in. So, first things first, start with a strong vision for your podcast. Again, start with a strong vision for your podcast, right? What's key here is that if you're gonna record an episode of your podcast, you obviously, I would imagine, have a strong, at least, concept for what your podcast is, right? You have a name, you have some branding, likely. Um, you have a goal or a theme, but maybe those things get taken a little for granted. Maybe you're jumping the gun a little bit. And so that's why I really want to reiterate a strong vision is key before you ever sit down to record an episode. You want to know your audience for your podcast. Again, you want to know your audience. Who are you speaking to? You want to know your goals. You want to know your goals. Who are you speaking to, and what do you hope to communicate? What do you hope they take away from your conversations? This might feel elementary, but it's very key to always keep these basics front of mind because they can get lost in the nitty gritty of prepping your podcast. So know your audience, know your goals, know your strengths and weaknesses, right? As a host, as a producer, what is going to come more naturally? What can you lean on to crush your episode? What's going to take a little extra work and that you're going to have to set some time aside to improve at, right? Whether that's in coming up with topics, research, the literal hosting, the on-camera presentation, all of it plays a role. So know where your strengths lie, know where your weaknesses lie, but not so that you can revel in the weaknesses, but rather improve them. Know where to differentiate and know where to lean on some established podcast tropes. You don't have to reinvent the podcast with your podcast, but you also don't want to be so run of the mill that no one can tell you apart from the ecosystem. What is setting you apart, right? Whether it's in your industry, whether it's, within the podcast world as a whole, whether it's among your competitors or peers, what differentiates you, but also what can you learn from to apply to your podcast that already works that the pros are doing? And again, reflect on all this in your podcast branding. Make sure that the visual, the sort of subliminal presentation of your podcast shares all of these goals, shares this vision for your audience, reflects your strengths, makes up for your weaknesses, differentiates, but also creates familiarity. Oops, skip there. There we go. Choosing your topic. So you've got a strong foundation. Now it's time to jump into a specific episode. You want to translate that vision, that foundation, into something actionable. So you want to know your audience. So then you want to ask what's interesting to my audience, right? You want to know your audience. That way you can ask yourself what's interesting to my audience and craft your topic around that specific framework. Then translate that to how does this help meet my goals as a podcast, right? What's interesting to my audience and how can I pose up some content, some conversation, some narrative, some voiceovers, some research, stats that are going to help deliver those takeaways for my audience that they're going to find interesting and that meet my goal of being an educational podcast for AV integrators or being a thought leading debate podcast for technology futurists, whatever it might be, right? Ask yourself what matches the style of our podcast and what pushes it, into new earned territory. So for example, if you are an interview podcast, you always sit down with a guest and you pick their brain. If suddenly you have an episode where it's just you talking into the mic and you're playing clips from a song that you really like and you're talking about that song, obviously that's not going to mesh with the goal of your podcast that's super interview focused. But let's be even more specific. What if you have a podcast that's very interview focused and then suddenly you hit your audience with a deep dive narrative documentary style podcast that weaves interviews in and out that you've been working on for months, that has a lot of sound effects and Foley in the background, right? You have the birds chirping and you really try to paint that auditory scene. Well, if your audience is used to sitting down and listening to 15 to 20-minute quick conversations with an expert, and then you hit them with that with no warning or sort of no guidance or on ramp, it might catch them off guard. They may not appreciate all the hard work that you put into it because it's not familiar, but it's also maybe doesn't feel earned. So you have to make sure that whatever you're doing for your episode through the larger conversation around your podcast, the marketing around it, the sort of tenure you've already built with your episodes, that it makes sense. And if you're going to deviate, just make sure it makes sense and that your audience is in tune with why that change is useful for this type of episode. Don't just trust that the content can speak for itself all the time. Quality content can do that, but always make sure that it feels earned and that it matches the style of your podcast, whatever that means to you. And then I like to review these newsworthy values. They are key. If you look at these newsworthy values, I find them as a trained journalist very useful for crafting a quality topic for a podcast. So, reviewing these and making sure that whatever you're talking on hits on at least one of these newsworthy values, I find very useful. It helps make sure that your story is actionable, that it is actually of consequence to your audience, and that whatever you're talking on, whatever interview you're hosting, whatever narrative you're crafting, has a strong foundation of storytelling and utility behind it. So again, the 7 newsworthy values, look those up and try to match them, right? I'd like to challenge y'all for your next podcast episode, whether you're hosting or producing, try to line it up with at least one of these newsworthy values. I think you're going to find a lot of utility there. Okay, oops, took that off. There we go. All right, next up, quality pre-production and research. You obviously want to make sure that you're set up for a good conversation. This happens by making sure that you don't forget those goals and audience. Goals and audience. I'm going to harp on this a lot, right? You want to know your own goals as a podcast. And for this specific episode, you also want to make sure you remember who are you speaking to the whole time, right? Who is your audience? How does this impact them? Why does it matter to them? Are these insights useful to them? All of that is key. Keep your goals and your audience nearby physically. Get yourself a little sticky note and remind yourself as you're preparing, what are your goals, what's your audience, and reflect on them as you prepare. Once you know who your guest is or the narrative, right? But I'm going to make an assumption here. A lot of the podcasts we see today out of B2B are interview style podcasts. So let's run with that. You're going to interview a guest, so you obviously want to know who your guest is, but more fundamentally, who is your guest, right? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What can they speak to? How do they present on camera? What kind of interviews have they done in the past? What kinds of topics do they prefer to speak to? Do they get heated about? Do they have a lot of pontificating to offer? All of that is useful to understand about your guest so that you can craft the best questions possible for them and to actually challenge them with something that gets their wheels spinning and in turn offers an actual useful conversation that isn't just for the sake of the people on the podcast, but for the sake of the audience, right? And fulfilling the goals of the podcast. Again, goals and audience. Research your topic and the timely updates around it. This kind of goes back to the newsworthy values, right? Timeliness, impact, but knowing how to intersect things that are of immediate relevance going on in the world, going on, related to your industry, and intersecting that into your conversation helps ground and plant a flag for why are we having this conversation now, right? Why are we talking about green building codes in the middle of October of 2023? Is this a more recent trend? Was there some news that motivated this conversation? Are we not seeing enough buildings take heed and adjust their operations to be more sustainable? I mean, like, what's the reason? Why are we having this conversation? That kind of timeliness, even if it isn't the focus of your conversation, but even if it can just be intersected, helps give a lot of validity to why you're doing the podcast in the first place. Make sure to lay out a story and a narrative. That's always key. Even if you're just doing a conversation and it's an interview, interviews still have a story and a narrative, even if it's just a conversation. Your conversation has to start by painting initial context. It has to introduce a theme. It has to set the stage for why the theme is important. It has to, present perhaps a trend, issue, challenge. It has to contextualize it, pick it apart. It has to offer a solution. It has to then intersect the solution in practice. It has to then analyze impacts from if this was implemented in practice, et cetera, et cetera. If it's a conversation, that doesn't mean that it isn't still a story and doesn't mean that it doesn't still have a narrative that you can craft and be intentional about. So scope out those beats. What beats do you want to hit with your conversation beyond just topics, beyond just questions, but really how does each beat from question to question to question advance the narrative? That will make your podcast very engaging. And then prepare thoughtful questions, but don't overdo it. And by that, I mean don't overscript or over prepare to the point where you have turned your preparation into a crutch that pulls you out of the moment. You want to be in the moment. You want to be in the moment with these conversations, or else the audience is going to be able to tell that it's a bit manufactured, it's a bit stiff, it's a bit robotic. You want to prepare so that you can be in the moment. Prepare so you can be in the moment. Don't prepare to the point where you have now overdone your preparation and are pulling yourself out of the moment by constantly having to reference a specific script or too many notes that don't keep your listening ears on and actually turn them off and just have you sort of reading off essentially a teleprompter. So now for during the podcast episode, this is relevant mostly for hosts, but if you're a producer, these are tips that you might want to share with your hosts and also with your guests. Make sure that, again, you prepare bullet points. You prepare, but you don't over prepare, right? Script, but don't over script. Have reference points, but don't have so many that you get lost in your own reference points. That's key. And I like to have them visually too on my screen so that I can quickly reference them. And if there is something scripted I need to read, it's there and very available. Stay conversational and natural. As someone who's done this for a long time, I like to overscript. Sometimes I even have straight up lines that I read off my script. But I've been doing this for so long that I can really play it off and play it up as authentic and natural. And I know how to intersect language and fluff up and intersect actionable commentary within a scripted bit that keeps it authentic and in the moment and not manufactured, not stiff. That may not come as naturally to you if you are just starting as a host or you're still refining those chops, and that's totally okay. Do what you can to stay as conversational and natural as possible, right? Again, as conversational and natural as possible. Ooh, just got a question here from Sarah. Hello, Sarah. How much time do you expect each question will take to answer? That's a good question. I would say that this really depends on the scope of your conversation. I mean, again, if you pose a question that has an expert say, for example, okay, I need you to go ahead and paint the context of where has IoT technology evolved in the last 5 years? Wow, that's a big question. That might take 5 whole minutes to sit and respond to. The question might be a little bit more like, tell me a little bit about your favorite IoT product that you saw launched last year. That might take 60 seconds to 2 minutes to respond to. But I'd like to think that most good podcasts are around 30 minutes. 20 to 30 minutes is key for a starter podcast, as to not overdo it, to keep it focused. And therefore, if you prep 5 questions and each one takes, 3 to 5 minutes to respond to, that's already 15 to 25 minutes with only a few questions. And a lot of it too does come down to how conversational are you in that back and forth? Are you just facilitating a Q&A where you just read a question, they answer, you read a question, they answer, you read a question, they answer? Or are you trying to have a conversation with this guest? So when they answer, do you ask a follow-up? When they answer, do you throw in some commentary? Do you color it? Do you make the conversation connect through more natural, authentic tissue? That's going to introduce a lot of variable time. Could be a quick 60-second back and forth. Could be 5 minutes of a tangent on something that the guest brought up that sparked something that you hadn't prepped, but is very useful to the conversation. So I don't know that it's always the most useful to feel like you've got to time yourself. I got to make sure each question is at least 5 minutes. I think what's more important is, how is each question advancing the goal of my podcast? How is each question stimulating thoughtful discussion? And how am I making sure each question stays on target? Because you could pose a question that's so broad that the guest takes it in 10 directions, and now they've been speaking for 10 minutes straight. And just because it's 10 minutes long doesn't mean it's a useful 10 minutes. So thoughtful questions yield thoughtful answers. Focused questions yield focused answers. And with that as a foundation, you can then follow up with better in-the-moment commentary. And that should help flesh out a good 20 to 30-minute podcast. So, if you need a number, I'd say maybe, 5 minutes or less is a good pace for question, answer, question, answer. But again, more importantly here is that conversation, that natural feel, that back and forth, that authentic sourcing of thought leadership is more important than cramming as many questions as possible into a time frame, for example. or trying to get your questions to like a shot clock, unless that's the theme of your show and you're doing like an ESPN, like quick 60 seconds per commentary. That's also fun, right? You could totally do that. Cool. So I feel like I've covered the stuff on the left there, right? Conversation, natural. You want to obviously stay focused on the topic. I kind of mentioned that too, right? And crafting thoughtful questions. Keep your audience in mind. That will help your questions be thoughtful and stay in the moment. Again, your preparation should make sure that you can actually be present and keep your listening ears on and have for, a real thoughtful back and forth rather than over prep, rather than just facilitate a question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, done. That doesn't necessarily make for the best conversation, doesn't necessarily make for the most engaging piece of content for an audience. So again, that's why keeping that audience in mind, what are they going to find useful, entertaining, actionable, insightful? That's key. And then again, also, let's talk some quick tech tips. So you obviously want to make sure you have a quality camera. This can be as simple as an external USB webcam. A 1080p webcam is very accessible nowadays, relatively cheap, and you can get a solid entry level something for definitely less than $100, definitely less. And that kind of investment will pay off because you want to look better than your guests. If you're a host, you do not want your visuals, your audio, your presentation to be lower than, let's say, a thought leader who decided to invest in a ring light and a camera and a quality mic so they present well. If you're the host, you want to try to set a high bar. And getting to that high bar is relatively accessible. So, quality camera, quality mic. There's some really accessible USB mics. Um, Blue, the company, Blue produces really solid mics. The Blue Yeti is a super popular entry level USB microphone. Highly recommend it. And then obviously use MarketScale Studio. Our platform is going to help make this process very easy to facilitate a great conversation. We have a lot of built-in features within Studio to help clean up your background quality and to, make sure that the content captured is of highest quality, et cetera, et cetera. And then your presentation is key. You want to dress to impress your specific audience. If you are a technician and you're hosting an auto technician's podcast, you probably don't want to show up in a suit and tie. That might not speak to your audience. If you are doing a CEO investment roundtable podcast, you probably don't want to show up in a t-shirt and shorts unless you're Mark Zuckerberg or that's the tone of your podcast. It's chill. CEOs on break time, right? Dress to impress your specific audience. Match your presentation to your audience. And then more generally, find a quiet environment, clean up your background, make sure that you're presenting in a solid way. Make sure your lighting is good. I wouldn't recommend the lighting I'm in right now. It's very top heavy. You got a lot of shadows around my eyes. You want front facing light. So a ring light. Very accessible, also rather cheap. You can put it behind your camera and it spreads out light and lights up your face. And then angle yourself correctly. I'm going to grab my webcam here. We see a lot of this. You don't want to do this, where your laptop's kind of pointing up at you or something. Bad angles, you're going to kind of do this and you're going to look a bit intimidating or not great. You also don't want to do super high, like selfie mode, where you're looking up at the camera. You're going to look tiny and not authoritative. So you want to be centered up in your screen, right? This screen here. You want to be at eye level with the webcam. And you want to make sure that it's angled in such a way that you've got decent headroom, but not too much, right? To where you're like down here or where you're not getting cut off or you're like this. And that the whole frame looks presentable and intentional. That's really the key word. All right. I feel like I've covered the core basics here, so I'm going to open it up to Q&A here. We got a question there from Sarah, but if anyone else has any thoughts, any questions, let me know. Anything stand out to you? Anything you want more clarity on? I can go back to another slide. I can reiterate something. Anything not clear or, that you want more specific insights on, let me know. Looking for some advice on any specific topics, let me know. And if no one has any questions at this very moment, you can always email me. Email's here on the screen, daniel.litwin@marketscale.com. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to respond to your questions. I'm also always back here every 2 weeks. So I might be hitting on similar points, but I like to keep things fresh and evolve it week to week. And obviously, if you have fresh questions, the content's going to be a little different. So always feel free to find me here again, 11 a.m. Central, every other Wednesday for your specific podcast questions on how to prep your episode, make it solid, and crush it for your audience and crush it for your goals. So I'm not looking like we're getting any questions here. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and close up shop. If you have questions, you can email me. Happy to answer them. And we'll be back next time. But I'll leave you with my best suggestion, which is to consume more podcasts. If you want to learn how to make a good podcast episode, there are a lot of great podcasts to learn from. Plenty on MarketScale.com. I recommend you head to our channels page. Again, on MarketScale.com, you'll see so many great podcasts from internal and external folks. But also go to your podcast app, pick a genre, pick a topic that you find engaging, and listen to how they do it. How do they produce it? How do they interview? How do they structure the flow and the narrative? What does their audio sound like? What does their visual look like if it's a video podcast? And take note. There's a lot to learn from. So thanks again, folks. We'll see you around next week, or in 2 weeks, actually. And if you have any questions, my email's on the screen, daniel.litwin@marketscale.com. All right, we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.